This is an image of a mosque in Bhopal. So some of the images which have actually struck me and made me think here, as again going back to the quote of cultural construct, intellect and material, so and the time. So this is a prayer hall as part of the mosque, which is there, the shaded portion of the mosque near to the Qibla wall. This corridor talks about the culture. Without the intent of the prayers which happen here, the space has no meaning. So it talks about the time when it was built. It talks about the art and craft and belief through its small little motifs and the values which they had considered at that point of time in the history to be very, very valid. This is again from the city of Bhopal, which I've admired a lot. Near the upper lake of Bhopal, there is a palace, and this is just the facade, portion of the facade of the um, building, which is towards the rear side of the building too, which faces the waterfront. So here you can see why the purpose of giving this opening is such a beautiful thing, that the ladies chamber inside can actually have a private access to the water body over there. That's the functional purpose of like how we create balconies over here. But if you can see the detailing of the pilasters or the columns or the representation of where it is through the arch, because whole of India has these kind of arches, but the proportions of the arches vary to make it more contextual and to the responding to the context which we are talking about. So you can see the method of construction being also represented, and you can clearly see that it is a regional image of the place which we are talking about. There are very interesting spaces. As an urban designer, whenever I visit any city, it's not about architecture, but also in between buildings, which we get very, very inspired from. And this is an alley just outside this palace, in front of this palace, which is leading towards a lot of old mohallas and other areas of high income group of that era, where you can see the buildings which are of G plus 3 and G+2 minimum, with all the motifs almost as the palace. But if you can see the alley, the way it is being taken, apart from the build, if I remove the build and take it just as a SketchUp model of massing, also it's such an interesting way to pass through, and there is a lot of suspense for me what's going to come next. And it's too inviting for me when we look at the way the the stairs are being going in a perspective view, inviting me to enter. Or I can also say from the other way around, they are taking from a smaller thing like a gooseneck to enter into the palace front yard, which is again a big space. So these kind of interesting compositions are found in India itself. We don't have to go anywhere else to get inspired, rather than in our own soil. This is a fort of Gwalior, entrance of the fort of Gwalior. Again, entrances have been a cultural context, because thresholds are given a lot of importance in India. Like, when a newly married girl comes to his in her in-laws place, the way she enters, there's a lot of custom attached to it as to how she enters into the house. And there are a lot of customs which are related to getting in and getting out. A lot of stories also of, if you take up mythological characters of Narasimha, where the demon asked that I should not be murdered inside or outside the house. Then he was murdered on the threshold of the house. So like these kind of, mythological stories also talk about the importance of certain building elements. That is what I want you all to observe, because these building elements are probably lacking in the Western context. Because when you look at any Western buildings, the thresholds are seamlessly done so that you don't feel that you are in or out or something like that. I have images that similar kinds when I go to the concepts further. But in India, we feel that threshold is a very celebrated space, and you can see our fort entrance is. But then when you look at the smallest detail, it even has a puncture for a small pigeon to go. It has screens for women, where it again represents the value and culture of a place where women were given indirect access to the public space and men were given direct access. And when you enter, the proportions and scale and lot can be talked about it, but you know, all of them are cultural cues. So that is what I think is forgotten sometimes, where you think about how, what should be the height of entrance. You go to Le Corbusier man, and we say that 7 feet is something which is ideal. And we start fixing up 2.1 meter, and that becomes like universal scale. And when it go to monumental, it goes to 3 to 3.5 meters, like in your malls and etc. But that is again completely considering the human proportions. But you know, here the human proportion is also considered, but our cultural contact construct is something which is more adapted. And I use the word adapt to connect to this space inside the fort of Gwalior again. India is something which is so you know, unique in its culture, because you know, we welcome everybody. We have been going through the philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. I think you all know about it. We respect each other and we stay in harmony with the whole world. And if you look at it in architectural perspective, it is also represented whenever there are exchanges of knowledge, exchange of customs, exchange of ideas. Those are represented in this. Like Michael Jackson has brought in a new pop culture in India in dance. In the similar way, the way the people have, if you look at musical history also, the way the music, Carnatic music has transformed now to a fusion music and cinema songs, all of them have base in classical music. So the way the transitions have happened is because of the cultural, you know, what you can say, exchanges which have happened. This space is a court, one of the courts, like what you can call as Diwani Khas, similar to it. It cannot be termed as Diwani Khas, but a hall where royal people used to congregate. Here, the whole idea of, you know, what you can find in a basilica has been represented. Even the column details are far very plain and represent Greek and Roman column details, not completely, but there is a fusion of Doric Ionic order in this, and completely it's a false ceiling kind of a design, completely done in stone, but then it's a representation of that. This kind of cultural intrusions and then exchanges have also gotten very beautiful ideas into India. And this is another one where I think this is all known to you all. So when we walk through these monuments, I think these are forgotten sometimes by taking like a lot of time for selfies and understanding the proportions, where to stand when, where the sun is falling on you, and you have to focus yourself properly while taking selfies. And we get only 45 minutes to 1 hour to just go through the monuments. So we forget kind of these kind of wonderful details, though sometimes the guides also talk about it. So this is the way the rainwater harvesting. Okay, sorry, there was some thing in the chat box which just me. All questions you can just, I'll answer it at the end. Yeah, so these are some of the details of rainwater harvesting as to how do you collect rain and then use it sustainably for fountains. And this was brought in by Persian ideas. And something which is cultural and the influence of the values, I want to talk about rainwater harvesting. Yes, we give a lot of scientific preferences to the source of water. But then can you see this kind of details? It is a pattern which is created when the ripples of water actually fall on it. It gives a very dynamic feeling. Without the water also, the dry landscape is so beautiful with this pattern, which is responding to, again, the flow of water on it. So this is the way the water is being collected and then goes into the you know, water pool over there, when again it runs as a fountain. So these kind of things, these patterns are again cultural. So you cannot say where did the source come from, and you have all reason for every small little detail which comes up from, like how you have cues of Vedic architecture translated into stone, in these kind of things, in these kind of monuments like a stupa of Sanchi again, where you can see this Suchi and Taba detail, which is a very known detail in the railing, which has been taken care of, and also the overall form representing certain kind of a non-physical aspect, connection from human to something which is divine or the spiritual, is the whole concept of it. Because architecturally there's no space inside this stupa, there's nothing, it's just a mound kind of a thing, what we can call in a lame word, but it has certain lot of philosophical and metaphysical, rather I would say metaphysical meaning attached to it, and the association which has made this popular. Because otherwise there are so many natural hills, hillocks and etc., where people can go and just go around it and come back, but the association to a stupa from the Buddhists has made this whole monument a great thing. And also the meaningful insertion of the stories of Jataka tales and etc., which enhance and educate people about where they are and why they have come, is very unique in India. When you go to any temple also, just take a circumambulation around the temple and you will come to know everything, like a CV. I remember this word CV because Madhu ma'am was asking me for like CV, I think from 2-3 days, and I didn't send it to her. So I still have that word in my mind whenever I talk about this session. So the CV of the god inside will be known to you completely. His ancestors, his successors, daughters, granddaughters, everything, all stories, and his achievements, everything will be shown to you across. And by the time you reach inside, you know the true value of the person who is there as a stone piece, and why you have to revere him in your heart and pray for him. And even there, if you look at the basic module of a temple, again, it is out of function that you just require two spaces. One is to stand and one is to, of where the deity is being kept. From here, you started, the architecture of temple architecture also started, but with a lot of meaning, it actually evolved out of. So if you look at the roots of it, it is nothing but a detail of any house which was present before. So if you look at traditional architecture in another way, it was used as a space to celebrate certain kind of human activity. Like, we find canals, we kind of find wells everywhere across in India, but the attractiveness of any Kalyani in South India and Baulis in North India cannot be forgotten, because people go there not only to fetch water, but fetching water and having certain kind of a subsidiary activity over there, that is not found anywhere, I think, in the whole world. Right now in the Western context, we have pipelines running around under us. We don't even know where water actually is coming from, and then you just enjoy the tap water or bathtub probably. But that's where you see water now actually. The times in India have changed a lot, whereas this architecture before was something, a representation of our cultural values again. And again, not to forget, art was always part of architecture. Craft was always part of Indian architecture. That's what a lot of people keep telling, that the better marriage of craftsmanship, art, artisans, and architects is what Indian architecture can be defined. Without craftsmanship, you cannot have traditional Indian architecture at all. I have some more illustrations for you to show for that. So with all these things in a contemporary sense, I don't want to talk about historic documentation today, but architectural design today, of what we are all following kindly, is probably a conscious decision-making act. As an architect, you want to say that I want this because of, say, ABC reasons. Or you will sometimes have no reason, because you just felt that it has to be like that. People can also design it. There's no right and wrong in architecture, as we all know. But if we look at history, It was a cumulative act wherein choices were validated by tradition. Whenever you have a rider here today, in today's decision making act, you might just say that it is not enough for so many people, or it is not conducive for differently abled people. Our way of looking at design has completely changed from this cultural perspective, is what I want to tell you all. Because historically, it was all completely of culture. As I told you, rainwater harvesting was part of our culture. Celebrating water is what was part of our culture. Celebrating each and every festival in a very socialistic way was part of our culture and tradition. So that was something which was guiding us to design. So Shilpis and Stapatis did not look for an example in the past to anchor their work. So tradition provided the necessary references for them as to we can do this. So changes did occur very gradually, but very less violently, saying that this is bad and I do this. So hey, see, this is something which I've done. Like what happens postmodernism, in modernism, postmodernism, deconstruction. Each and everybody's idea has to be represented. Everybody is good, and I don't say it's a negative thing, but still we have a certain kind of a tradition which ruled then, which is lacking now. So here, this is the best example of Padmanabhapuram Palace, where it's a best culmination of Stapatis and Shilpis together to get that building what it is. If you look at each and every detail, there is a marriage between the arts and crafts and architecture. The overall massing, the elements of architecture are articulated through arts and crafts. That's how interwoven was the profession then. So if you can look at these kind of beautiful details, you don't find it right now in the concrete technology, which we can do, because it's more onto technology rather than it's more onto crafting your buildings. So how do we read such kind of aspects? Because the problem is here. How do we read architecture? So whenever you do a case study, if I talk about Padmanabhapuram, some person would have been already Googling about it. So fast it is to get all those information about it. So we start reading the plans. First thing, as architects, we start reading plans and look at abstract relationship between the physical elements. But the second thing which comes sometimes, which we forget, is experiences through those buildings. We need to read about the experiences which people get. It's not possible for all of us, and right now though, it's very difficult that physically you go and visit architecture. I had, have seen so many students, when I asked them in first year, why did you join architecture? They would say that I want to travel world. So I think it's architecture. So you get a lot of study tours and etc. So you have a lot of options to travel. So, but when we travel, it's not about the physical elements, but it's about the experiences. So, right. But today, whenever we do our studies, it's mostly dominant on the physical aspects of design, which is on geometry of the place. The cognitive aspects of design or a building, or rather architecture, is not that well understood and documented and felt, rather, I would say. So for example, if you take up this plan of Srirangam, everybody looks at this plan and you know that it's like, axial, it has different kinds of axis symmetry, so many axis wise symmetry, and it has components, it has progression from one point to another, accentuation, blah, blah, all the points you write about, taking care of the physical aspects of the city of Srirangam. But imagine being near the third Gopuram gate and watching the fourth and fifth Gopuram as a frame. Photographers do this very well. A good photography through those places takes care of these kind of visions. And secondly is the experience when you walk through this. What is the transition you get to feel from the largest Gopuram, which has all the noise of the city? As you go in, the filtering happens. You kind of get infiltrated as you go into the lowest sanctum Gopuram. You get rid of all the external noise, etc., etc., physical disturbances, and you start concentrating. And that's the idea of actually having this. So the process of infiltration happens. That's just one concept which I'm talking about. So like these kind of experiences, when you get infiltrated into first one, second one, third one, fourth one, how do you feel? How do you document that and then get that in your buildings when you start designing has to be thought of. And I think these kind of things right now, I don't know if in future, if we can have all these will all be documentations and that's it. So yeah, so these kind of festivals and their relationship. And when you go to a festive place, I think in Kolhapur you have Mahalakshmi temple, there will be a lot of festivals over there. Going on a festival day to that Mahalakshmi temple and a non-festival day, which is like considered very normal, you go there and you can get direct darshan, probably not even waiting for 15 minutes. And during the same festival time, the god gets so inaccessible to normal people. There'll be thousands of people flocking to actually meet the deity inside. So those kind of cultural concepts, how do you actually consider? Because these proportions are derived for those cultural traditional ideas that need to be considered, just not for creating monuments and showing the gate of Nayaka Empire or Chola Empire when they started it. So Chola, Pandya, and Sera, and lastly the Nayaks, who actually inculcated this whole Madurai and Srirangam temples. It's not to show their gate itself or monumentality just for the sake of it, but actually to capture these inside the temple activities. So I think those kind of activities have to be documented somehow and recorded for us to get some qualitative aspects in our design. This is just how it looks from the entrances. Right now it's all cluttered because all of these developments. So yeah, but still that's like part of the game now. I don't want to get into that urban aspects of it. So these kind of beautiful, meaningful constructs need to be thought of. And this is something Kula or Teppada Kula, or what we call it as Kalyani, famously known as. It's part of every temple, but these architectural motifs are giving a sense of entry, exit, sense of focus in the whole space. They have function, but they also have a cultural representation to what they have been done. Each painting, each column detail has certain kind of a relation to the space which is being designed. So rather these days we only look at these things, but some of the questions we generally can ask in a perspective ground, which is okay to even today's context, is it comfortable or to be there? What part of the place is cool, shady in hot summer and warm in winter? Do my feet follow my eyes very unhindered in any space? How does it feel to be in a dense and compressed space? What is the quality of light which is very inviting, which is not inviting, which is harsh, and etc. So these kind of qualitative aspects I think we find in every architecture which needs to be addressed. And also qualitative aspects of the form, as to how do you fix up your perspective. When an eye looks at your model, whatever you're doing for your design, how does it fix up? When you fix up an eye, even in a WhatsApp render on a SketchUp, where do you fix your eye, and how does the building look at that? We all take a bird's eye view to show our concepts, which are birds and parrots and pigeons and etc., which are very nice to look at from top. But human eye has certain kind of a point where we need to fix the perspective. From that visual perspective, what is my building needs to be understood very well. Otherwise, we will probably lose out on this experiential aspect, is the whole thing. This street might look very great from the top plan or very bad from the top plan, but it is a very vibrant thing with lot of activities over there when I look at the eye view of that. So is there a problem in architectural representation itself in plans right now, what we are trying to do? So trying to representable entity like presence of buildings and forgetting the space of habitation. The more focus is basically on the representable entities. Have you shown window? Have you shown sill level? Have you shown roof, parapet, etc., 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 which are all physically felt. But something which is ignored is, have you seen the level of lighting when you give that size of window? Have you considered it? Have you considered thermal comfort? Have you considered what kind of cultural construct, like your grandmother would feel in that room. So those, I think, need to be felt first. If not, it cannot be shown in our drawing skills. But then how do we present it, again, is the question which I have to you all today to think for. The space is made mobile by the engagement of a moving body and presupposes the presence of human occupiers. Building is static. People also say that building is dynamic, and sometimes we misunderstand that dynamic buildings means movable buildings which turn, transform each and physical element. But building is so different. Architecture is so dynamic because of light, and because of the way we inhabit the space at different time. Time is the fourth dimension in architecture which decides most of the things. It loses all meaning in the absence of human presence. For each of the buildings, images and icons embody meaning that are encrypted in the cultural ethos and can be revealed only through an active engagement with this space. Only if there is human interaction, the space is formed. If the dance of a moving observer is the motion in space, architecture thus is space in motion. That is what makes it almost impossible to represent, because you cannot sketch all the movements of a dance feature. You cannot note down every nuances of a keyboard playing. There are certain things which are left for the artist at some point of the day to do. You can just videograph it and then take a snapshot at every second or microsecond. Then also some movements keep on changing if you take a video of a dance. In the similar way, architecture is also very difficult to represent because the time and light have their own way of representing. Like those kind of buildings, like you have this building which is not at all monumental in scale. This is Gandhi Ashram by Charles Fourier in Ahmedabad. Whereas when you go inside and feel the feel of these spaces, the communication it does to you of representing the philosophy of Gandhi and what India was during Gandhian period, and each and every nook and corner for that matter. Even the photographs are not the best way to represent it, but I think this is so dynamic when I see here these photographs where you talk about every quality which can be very less measured. You cannot express this complete building with a concept diagram nor plan nor a section or something like that, but unless and until you talk about the feeling when you stand probably here, how do I feel when I stand here, how do I feel? So those kind of feelings have given lot of meaning to what the building is today. The second building of another master architect is nothing but none other than D.V. Doshi of IIMB corridors. In plan, it looks like, there are three grids. One grid is a pergola, second grid is shaded, the other grid gives entrance and exits to the classroom and other spaces. But then the dynamism is only felt when you look at the volume and when you go and experience it over there. Yeah, all of us right now, you can ask me, we don't have option to go there. But then when you read about these buildings, you have to capture also that this volume gives this kind of a feeling. This volume, this is a representation of this culture. So these kind of invisible aspects of design also need to be captured, and probably a word for that can be given so that those words itself become keywords for your concept, is what probably I think so. Yeah, and this is another example who made me think about topic of today. Architect Peter Rich, and he was here in our institute for a master class for students where he showed these works of his. This is basically a cultural center in African subcontinent where here you can see the way the whole design is generated completely through the scale of human. Being a human building, how do you see? So when you look at as a form, it need not have the said design principles of your theory of design, say rhythm or whatever it is, axis and etc. But to a human scale, each of those things are actually captured. This is how it blends with the context, not standing out in its own sense, but all the materials used, the techniques and etc. are completely from the way the context used to work. I think even in your part in Pune, outside and etc., since you have forts, these were the places where they used to uh, save gunpowder for the time during the war, produce and save the gunpowders safely in this stone kiosks. So later they can take during the wartime and use it. So those are some things which represent the area in and out at that point of time. When you see the building in this scale, you find a lot of design principles, whatnot, whichever all of you are actually watching too. So you get this. So there is design principle, not from the top as to how the plan is being worked out from top, but a vision, human level of interaction of building to the person. The second one, which also I admire a lot, is this Therme walls of Peter Zumthor, where again the whole world talks about it for phenomenological aspects which it has. It's just nothing but a spa in our own, in a very easy terms, where you have some massage rooms, you have aquatic therapies and etc. But then the way it is being handled is completely different. As you can see, somebody taking bath like this, and then you have such a picturesque view which is not in your sight, but it is connected to the sight in a visual sense. That's what I'm talking about. The experience over here, can no plan or section can explain you this. You can just physically say that there is a connection, but what kind of a connection are you looking at? We all say that there is a connection to the next one. There is a lake, I've opened it up, I have my windows facing to it, but what kind of a window, and what kind of an experience in that connection we are experiencing is something which is very important to be documented. So these are thresholds in Western context. To just tell you, the context, as the context vary. This is in Switzerland, so the Swiss context varies from Indian, so the thresholds are completely different. So where you have these kind of very interesting views, etc. So coming back to the main concept, architecture is an object where you do it with a lot of building materials and all physical things, elements, etc. But it should lead to the experience of certain kind of a subject. So, and yeah, we need mud, we need brick, all building materials to do some kind of an architecture, but that need to have an experience in terms of a subject. So that subject matter of why are you doing architecture is pretty important, because we have seen a lot of memorials where there is no building. And we have also seen memorials like Jewish Museum where everything is inside the building. So it's the decision of how do you want to represent the subject, rather than the objective way of how many square feet I'm going to build and how high I'm going to go, and what are the elements used. Rather than that, what kind of an object represents the best the subject. Sometimes memorials are done completely only through landscapes. That's because maybe that is the way you have to represent. So the whole subject is what I want to talk about today, is going anti-object. The anti-object is nothing but a way to think architecture in a very humanized way, and secondly, giving more importance for the function or the subject matter of why are you going to do some alteration in the environment. I would say, if you're going to remove a tree and going to do one small room over there, then what is the need for it, and what is the subject experience out of it, is the question which need to be spoken here. So conception of an objective space independent of the experiencing subject will become suspect. So you suspect whether it is a better architecture or not. So for this, again, I go back to certain kind of a theory to look at it. So architecture of visual faculties talk about embodied vision, which is perceived through usage of your eyes. Whatever you see, that has been embodied vision. That is something which you have perceived through your eyes. Something which is mind's eye. Everybody's eye, mind also has this kind of viewing building, but eyes will have only sight, physical eyes, but mind will have four more senses activated whenever you go into a building, which are other four senses. So this is an imagination. So perception and imagination both are very, very important for architecture. So why I give lot past architecture, because all great architecture of the past is a result of successful resolution of this dichotomy, that is perception and imagination. They have a great imagination of this mind's eye, that how do I feel over there at that point, and also creating geometry even when you look at from the top or side plan section, etc. As better the resolution is between the perception and imagination, the good is the architecture what we can find. So now the whole point is spatial narrative versus conventional descriptive. What is this war behind spatial narrative and conventional descriptive? Let me start with the easy one. Conventional descriptive is about explaining a design given to you in terms of drawings, sketches, plans, like, you know, conceptual sketches, all types of drawing sections, etc. But how do you express the spatial narrative that the design, your design is actually giving to a person? So how do we do it? How do we explain? As an architect, you're not going to build and say that, see, this is the design. Every semester, you cannot build a real-time project. So what do we employ as a methodology to actually express this bodily experiences through architecture, rather than just looking at the you know, expressive descriptive plans and sections? So architecture is in between the finite world of man and infinite world of nature, because I would say that something metaphysical is going to work magic in any architecture. For that matter, this is the example chosen by Jaimini Mehta sir in his book, Embodied Vision, where he talks a lot about this example of Fatehpur Sikri, where you have a lot of you know, design principles excellently used to express all physical aspects and aesthetics of design. And also each every embodied vision, that is basically whenever you stand here, the feeling, the vision, the progression which each and every point gives you is completely explained very well in this design. Whenever I say this example of Fatehpur Sikri, I don't have to explain much to architecture students, so I'm just going a little faster here. So buildings in space are built form and spatial arrangements match their stated purpose, that is form following the function. But architecture or location of buildings which defy purposive logic, there needs to be a logic also to your building. So what are these? Again, deconstructing in a very simple way. The build form and spatial arrangements is basically, you talk about zoning, you talk about style of architecture you want to take up, spatial organization, and composing principles which you are using. Whereas the logic of why are you going for cluster organization? Why are you going for an axial arrangement of a monument? Why are you using those kind of composing principles? Why are you using an earthen material for your project, etc.? That need to have a logic, and those logic are plurality of space, visual boundaries, juxtapositions, and symbolism in architecture, which again, the third layer, can be inspired from the culture of the person to root it to the context. You can take up any inspiration to make juxtapositions and symbolism. You can get a Western context, put it in Indian soil or something like that. That can be inspiration. But then if you want to make a contextual building where people have a lot of associative value to it, then all these concepts which I'm talking about, the logic of design, have to be somewhere inspired from the client, maybe the wish of the client, or from the culture and social background which he comes from. So netting, actually connecting back to all these things, we need to understand then the notion of space. I think that will be the last part of the presentation, where it becomes very important, because I've spoken about plurality of space, visual boundaries, and etc. So how do you actually harness this and actually start designing using these principles is by understanding what is space actually. Is space about 3 meter by 4 meter physically measurable dimension, or the space also has something which is immeasurable? Okay, like you have your systems, so the phone or mobiles, rather mobiles might be of same size, but the GBs of data you can store inside is completely different, maybe different companies, whatever it is. But again, it depends on the configuration. Our minds, maybe the size of the mind and etc might be very similar, but the knowledge which you all have differs from one person to another on certain subject. All of you are so knowledgeable, I know that. But yeah, it differs on certain subject. In a similar way, does space have, other than physical notions, need to be very well understood? For this, I refer to the idea of phenomenology, which I generally believe that it's a must read for all the students of architecture who are looking at, doing a strong design, which is very cognitively very strong. It's not about the form and texture and outside of the building, but whenever the building is being done, you have a good feeling when you go to a building. Like for example, you might go to 5 to 10 malls, but certain mall and certain space in a mall of that one particular mall gives you a lot of pleasure. So that kind of detailing and aura, how does it coming? How is it coming? That if you have to analyze, I think this needs to be the starting point. The five kinds of spaces, there are five kinds of space. One is pragmatic, one is perceptual, one is existential, I'm sorry, and the next is cognitive, and the next one is abstract. Pragmatic, let's start with something which is very basic. Pragmatic is something which you can touch, feel, see, hear, smell. Okay, something which is very, very physical. Something which is perceptual space is when you look at certain kind of a space, you feel that it is like this. Like, as I told you about the alley of the fort in the beginning. So I feel that it is very suspense. It has a suspense quality to it. So I perceive that. So like that kind of a perception, if it is creating, that space is known as perceptual space. Existential space is something which is existing with the feel and with the physical aspects which are being done. Cognitive is something, a space which is in your mind. Sometimes it happens, your design is in your mind, but you're not able to draw it. That is known as cognitive space. You're thinking about a wonderful space in mind, but you're not able to draw something which remains in your mind. Second type of cognitive is even after you visit a place and come back, you remember some parts of that place, not complete building, you cannot remember. You can remember only certain parts of it where you have had very good interaction. So that is known as cognitive. And abstract is, as you all know, it's completely abstract as a space and as a character. So somewhere to be in the concept of creating a responsible, sensitive space, we need to look at to be somewhere means to be located to its existential space. So thus the experience and perception of space consists in the tension between man's immediate situation and his existential space. We need to understand this context because always we think about perception and pragmatism in design. We don't go for this existential quality of space. That existential of quality of space will give you a lot of cues to do your concepts in design. That's why I'm just highlighting, because it's for all second to fourth year is what I'm being told. So in buildings, you can do the 5 ways which the book discusses is about the relationship between earth and sky. This is a photo of courtyard in Goa, Hindu house in Goa, how the courtyard is being connected to the outer space. This is actually outside the house, and this is the inside courtyard, as to how the relationship of that one element of courtyard is creating a great existential space over it. And then the second example I would quote is the falling waters, where the form has a termination in both below and above, like a romantic solution. And it's modern and organic in its sense. The way the projections are and the connections between the man and nature is very dynamic. The third one is having a same base, but you have the roof articulated in a very different way. John Hudson's buildings generally do that. And the fourth is a form which is flowing completely out of the ground, or you are tucking inside the ground and you have a romance with the earth and the sky in a very different way. The next one is like Laurie Baker's architecture, where you look at how the buildings start growing from the earth and meet the sky in a very different way. Or you take a break and say that I don't want to connect from the ground, and you go above the ground and stand out. The next one characteristics is about within and without. This is something which is very beautiful, where you don't know where is the threshold. This is Baba's work in Sri Lanka, where you cannot, I don't think so, which is the threshold over here. That's the difference which I was talking about, the first slide of modern, traditional Indian architecture to the modern. As the culture is changing, you have perceptions being changed and the existential space as well. So the same architect in his own house has these kind of features again. Threshold, which I told you matters a lot. And this is Anant Raj's building in Bhopal again, where we have different kinds of threshold, which is being framed in one single frame when you look at it. And again, it's inspired from Islamic architecture of Mandu and other regions. Openings and inviting nature, which you find. This is a photo from Goa. The wall, how it can create a space, just a wall and nothing else. This is Freedom Park in Bangalore. The roofs, how they can actually talk about certain kind of an experience. You have a lot of examples. So the underlying point which we need to keep to create an existential space is architecture is not an object, but it's a language. So through an architecture, we can actually speak and kind of convey certain kind of meaning. If that meaning is conveyed, and I think the architecture is pretty successful. So moving on from a space, the rather responsibility of an architecture could be to create place. What's the difference between place and space? Is basically if you have certain kind of a character to any space, that's known as a place. If you have this image, for you to make it pretty clear, without these people, this ghats have no meaning at all. The activity over there, the association value of these people has made the architecture, come and meet the water over there. So again, the root of all these things is human activity and social construct being very well harnessed to create a certain kind of an architecture. So here there are people, here are their dead bodies, but still people are making the function pretty active. So here, even in architecture, without people, but having a very good sense of place characteristics, we can find these kind of examples where the light, when you look at this, talks to you of certain kind of a character which it possesses, which is spiritual. And this is just scientifically a slit in the wall. So, and then these kind of spaces like Kala Academy in Goa, which kind of, have scales to it, and it kind of, invites. When you draw a section to it, you will probably understand that how inviting from the street edge to the building it is. Very humane. It doesn't like stand out, but it's a monument. That's like how do you handle with levels and etc. The third one of how do you harness the character and do a very humanized building with a great existential character is again this example of Doshi, where half was done by the architect, the other half was accommodated by the people themselves. And the third one, where you can actually look at how interactions happen and look at cultural motives. Here you have a water body and Kalyani and etc. Being abstracted, and you get into a modern context. This is by Charles Korea. There's a city center in Kolkata where you don't have a compound wall for a building, and that's something which is very strange in a context of India. And now metro station is also being built is built already, and it's working next to it, and it has a beautiful connection, and you don't know where actually the publicness actually ends. The threshold is completely very seamlessly done into the mall, and this is the mall design I'm talking about. Yeah, going back to another kind of architecture, if you ask me, only a few monumental buildings I showed and not the other ones. I just have these kind of things. So small little things. This is Nrityagram in Bangalore, where we can find each and every element having certain kind of a meaning, functional, point one. Point two, a cultural construct to be a dance studio, representing the culture, representing the method of teaching of Gurukul. This is done by Garand Kuna in Bangalore, again using alternative materials. So all these motifs are completely to the context, and yeah, that's something which gives you a different kind of a feeling. And this is inside NGMA Bengaluru, where you have a modern context of a seamlessly moving portions from one point to another, where you have a dynamic character to the building. So sense of place is a social phenomenon that exists independently of anyone's individual perceptions or experiences, yet is dependent on human engagement with its existence. So I think that's the difference between space and place. So you have this. I think you've seen scenes now during COVID and post-COVID, how these have completely transformed to be more greener corridors. But the way the people have inhabited this waterways excellently has given certain kind of character to this whole uh, place. So there are a lot of buildings which you can actually probably find as an idea, and probably go further or look at alterations which we can look at. So this is what I had to share with you all. 2 points. One is sense of place. The second one, basically on the way we can read and look at architecture. So, yeah, Madhu ma'am is there.
Yes, yes, sir.
So, can I stop here, or you want me to continue? Then I have few more slides on something little connected to it, so I can show it, or we can end it here.
Yeah, you can continue. You can continue, sir. Continue, sir. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So yeah, this is the second part of the thing. So which I just got to, as an answer, where like are actually architects thinking about this kind of characteristics and etc. Practically, the words which I've just floated to you all might be a heavy theoretical words, but just to understand how practically these have been done. Because when you hear to the talks of these architects, also you don't have these people using such jargons which are there in the theory, but then when you look at analyze these buildings from the perspective of what they've done, so I think you get an answer as to those are having these kind of characteristics which make it very unique for that matter. So architecture creates built environments as three things. So it's basically ABCDE of architecture, as cultural artifacts, as a developmental practice, and it's as an environmental stewardship. Why architecture is called as a cultural artifact? Because this becomes very important for us in modern context also, as to how do you represent. Because just by posing a question, if I stop, then there'll be a lot of doubts in your minds as to probably he just read the book and left it there. But I just like looking at practice and contemporary. I've been inspired from a lot of architects. I'm just going to show some of them, three architects for all the three topics very quickly. The first one which we are looking at is cultural artifacts, and I quote Charles Correa, architecture is sculpture with the gestures of human occupation. That's what I think we were talking about till now. And the project which I would want you all to relate to it is the projective histories of Shiva Temple in Pune. I think you all know about this. You're from that zone, by this architect, where you have this temple which is completely using landscape as the outer shell, or prakara, what we call it as, and it's a modern representation of a philosophy of temple. All the philosophical aspects of temple architecture are kept in mind, but the cost, the context, and also using the ideas and cues from the context is what something which makes this project very, very evident. And I think you would have had talks from these architects directly. So I'll just say that these are somewhere conceptually, related to the topic which I'm talking today. So I've just got these slides from his website to just show you like how the concepts which I'm talking about can be related. The second one is Steps, Temple of Steps. It's an ideated project which he has tried to look at, where the ghats itself extend to form parts of the temple itself. Here also, again, how the context can be manipulated to look at the cultural efficiency of that place, and you enhance it through a contemporary design approach. So it's not very tough for us to, stop at that as theory, but you can still work on these kind of things. And I think the best executed project is this Jitwana project at Sakarwadi near Pune again, where it's a Buddhist vihara, contemporary Buddhist vihara, where the whole idea of whatever we are talking about, it's a very simple project with a community center and monks meeting hall and etc. But just 4-5 spaces, and then this is how it looks like. And why I call it as crafted, again, this every detail of it is again, inspired from one or the other Indian way of doing it, and then it's been translated to another material language to suit the character of the building. Like, for example, you can see the gutter detail, you can see the way it has been done. I'll just show you one more typical. Yeah. So these are the typical ones which we were used to do before when we had complete wood construction. And now you have a composite way of doing it, precast and this, because it again talks about a complete different kind of a detail. So even at this level, you find the cultural association to these kind of buildings. And that's how people make the building very regionally, rooted to the context, rather than being just universal about the whole place. So some of the images just to say that how the respect for the plantation inside or landscape inside can be given. The whole design is just so sensitive to the environment which is there around. The architect is none other than Sami Padora of Mumbai. And yeah, to just end this part of it, I quote Moshe Safdie, where he talks about architecture is not about building the impossible, which we can do if we have enough money and enough tools and enough computers. It's about building what is appropriate and about attaining beauty through such an approach. It describes this premise as inherent buildability, and I believe it is central to what I do. That is what he does. So basically here we are talking about what minimum can be done, not what maximum. So whenever you're altering, so I would say that we need to look at altering the whole environment. That has given me a new vision to architecture, I would say. I'm not able to completely put into practice because of my constraints of being an academician, but I've passed it on to all my students, where we generally think about the whole project as an environment, which I have taken the whole site, not looking at only sun path and wind direction and leaving the environment there, but looking at the culture and contexts around. So if you take the project in that context, so you have certain kind of a thing which you need to do. So most of the times in a higher semester, uh, I prefer not to do a brief and give to students. That also I generally have practiced, and it has given a lot of good results for us. While I tell you it's a very tough job for all of us to when it comes to evaluation and etc. But when I give a free hand to anybody to think about what can be done in that environment, so probably like we do temple, a bank and a temple next to it, but the bank might fail, but the temple will be running very well. You've seen a lot of examples inside city like that, where they do just for the sake of having a public intervention in their side, but that works better than this. Like how Pani Puri stalls outside mall make a lot of money compared to the branded shops inside, sometimes branded dining shops inside. So like these kind of smaller aspects in design can be understood with understanding the culture and social order which is existing in this society. When you look at architecture as a development practice, how do you come up with this construct? So again, small equals big. So this is a project by another architect which I'm showing. This is a small area where an institute wants to interact with the public, a small kiosk kind of a thing near Shantiniketan in Kolkata, where they want to have a public intervention where people, it's like a bus stop now being experimented as being an experience center of what happens inside Shantiniketan. So basically this will become like the invitation pavilion, or you can say interpretation or information center about Shantiniketan. And you can see how the project has been conceived, where you invite everybody to know about what is Shantiniketan. It's just a pass-by space. When you're waiting for bus for say 5 to 10 minutes, you get educated about what's Shantiniketan. That's challenging that way. And if you're really interested, then you go into this build space and enter the university. So these are some of the images of that small kiosk. You can see the scale of the project built, but most of the other part of it is completely unbuilt for making it more attractive. The next one is a cultural center. It's a huge project, which was a competition project, which this office had attempted. It's a Bamiyang Cultural Center, where you have a lot of, any cultural center would represent the features of that kind of an architecture. So in the modern context, how do you take that was the complete idea. Whereas again, the human scale, the interaction at every spot, wherever you see the rendering, you see what activity might happen over there, has given success to this project. And incorporation of arts and crafts also, you can see. This is something which is very interesting and peppy, which I thought, because this was a street light design where you don't actually use any electricity. Okay. This is something which is very interesting, which I talk about product design with my students. So this was nothing but taking a design, a graphic design kind of a thing, which you do in first year. But if you give a lot of thought for your abstract models, which you have done in your first year, you can do the best designs possible, I think. But as we go from first year to fourth year, you get more rooted to functionality and buildability of your project, where you actually forget the fun of all these kind of things. This is nothing but bamboo things which are like erected, and then you have just reflective stickers put on it, and it looks like this in the night. How? Because vehicles will have light, so you don't have to have investment to reflect light from traffic signal. So you have these kind of patterns which are like very interesting compared to this ones. So these kind of ideas can be put like this. This is a Ganesh Mandal actually. So even there they've used it, and this is the entrance pavilion to that Ganesha area, and the architect was Abin Chowdhury. So you can think about these kind of things. Development need not be acres together, and you do floors together, 40 floor, 50 floor building to change the environment. You can do such small ideas. These are none of them are mine, but I'm showing the best which I consider them as. So architecture isn't about creating new buildings. Sometimes it's about retuning what's already there. Because in a context like India, I think we had such an being one of the oldest civilizations on earth. We have had all of these. So what to pick, how to pick, and where to adapt and adopt it becomes a very good task for all of us. It's just that we have to just go back centuries old and learn and come back and interpret it in a different way, is what I think inspires all of us. Lastly, environmental stewardship, how you can humanize buildings, as we spoke about traditional concepts of rainwater harvesting, this, that, and all. So this is an example of how a vernacular architecture can be represented, but this is a very challenging one. Project in Hunarshala campus, where they had actually done it for post earthquake houses in Bhuj and Kutch areas basically. So you have a lot of these traditional vernacular ideas. So all the modern buildings fell down, but these buildings had a lot of, resistance towards, I would say, resilience towards the natural disasters. So the architect took up all the principles from these things, and he has done a great job involving the craftsmen. Even all the three architects, whichever we saw, have this kind of element of craft, arts and craft involved in them. So this painting, maybe the detailings, maybe all of them are craft related, which also generates a lot of job opportunities for the localites. And you can have these kind of elements which are people familiar with to start off. And yeah, what inspires you traditionally from to now? I think this is the best example which I can give you is this one. I think in even in Maharashtra, you have that old houses had these hangers on wall, which you can close and open and then hang it, and then you can, like, it can be squeezed in like full of gates. In the similar way, this is completely a dismantleable stair. For example, if there is an earthquake, okay, let it fall down, you can take off, and whenever is required, you install it again. So that kind of adaptability is already there in some of the elements in our design. We just have to look for them and do it. So there are a lot of commercial projects also which you can do as an experience which you get from these things, and also create a lot of job opportunities for this and represent what you are as, the soil of where you are actually building. So it's basically we can learn from other parts of the world, but we need to show what it is to us. And again, community participation of this project is something which is very, very unique. I just end with this one where the builders were taught to, and the localites were taught how they can build their own house and make it earthquake resistant. And I think you would have gone through these case studies in higher semesters. So, but this is also a way where you create an associative value, because when you construct, it will be like this, but after a few days, it will become like this. That is how you kind of inhabit, and that's the art of inherent in our culture. So a lot of modules based on Indian architecture were developed, and the architect credited for this is architect Sandeep Vermani. So, ending the presentation again with Charles Correa, I would quote, architecture is a three-legged stool: climate, culture, technology. Uh, so with these three things, we can, I think, look at how we can bring a very sensitive built environment rather than building is what I would want to share with you all. Again, this is another quote: design creates culture. Culture shapes values, values determine the future. So, relating to the first quote of how Indian architecture had already done it, I think we have to go back in our cycle and how our designs can actually bring up culture. So it's not that we have to go back to the old traditions and customs. Please don't misunderstand me saying that I'm branding something of going back to traditional rituals. I'm not talking about any rituals and etc. But I'm talking about the cultural bondings we have with the nature through architecture, which we need to actually explore as a responsible architect. I think your building will create, because there's also a quote in architecture: we create buildings and then they shape us. So your building, whatever you're going to build, a smaller or a big project, will have an impact on the user later. It might, there are a lot of researches now being done as to a lot of buildings which are inducing fear, which are inducing happiness, which are inducing comfort, not comfort, etc., etc. So I think these will give you a lot of cues for that. So it's right time for us right now. We have a lot of time to think about what's value, what's culture, and how can you design to actually look for creating such a kind of building, or rather altering the built environment. Thank you.